Hey everybody, Janae here with the Leadership Remix, back again with another video. I am really excited because today I'm going to do a follow-up to one of my previous videos. I haven't been making videos that long, so it's not that many videos ago. So please feel free to go back and watch it either before or after you watch this, but watch them both, help us out. But the video that I made was called Difference is Not Deviance. And it was all about how just because someone is different or something is different or an idea is different or whatever doesn't mean it's deviant, doesn't mean it's bad or wrong or broken, needs to be fixed. None of that. It just means that it's a different perspective. It's a different idea. So today I'm trying to build on that idea essentially by not only saying that difference is not deviance, I want to say that difference is data. When somebody comes to you and, has a completely different idea of a concept than you do, what they're giving you isn't like resistance or pushback or deviance. Again, what they're giving you is more information. What they're saying is there's another way to look at this concept, this idea, this situation, whatever it is. And if we, in the last video, I think I talked about practicing reflective non-judgment. If we can take in an idea, not judge it immediately and just say, oh, that is more information to consider. Maybe it's something that gets incorporated to your idea. Maybe a piece of it gets incorporated to your outlook or how you view things. Or maybe it just doesn't, but it also helps you to understand that there are different ideas about this thing and what one of those ideas might be. In my doctoral program, one of our first semester, one of our instructors really, one of our professors really hammered in the idea of counter arguments and being able to address when someone, when you put out an idea, theory, or whatever, and someone has a critique of it, how are you able to address that, or even addressing it in your original article or in your original work, saying, I understand this is an idea that's out there, and even maybe saying this is the reason why I don't subscribe to that idea, or whatever it is, but being able to address those concepts, those other perspectives, again, even if you don't agree with them, being able to address them helps you to both be and appear more well-rounded, more of an expert in the subject, and expert might not be the right word, but more aware of the concept that you're talking about. And I just think that adds to your argument if you can debunk arguments, ahead of time, like saying, I've considered this. You may be thinking this, I've thought about that, and this is my response. And sometimes it just helps to have a fuller understanding of a picture to be able to talk about it more fully or, in a better way. So, I think that we need to be thinking of difference as data. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in this video, but that's the main premise. We'll talk some more about things like conflict and all of that. But really, I'm moving from difference is not deviance to difference is data. And I think all of this is hopefully painting the picture that we really need to start embracing differences and thinking about them differently, and stop kind of shutting the door on conversations when a different perspective is brought up. Because another thing is, if we say we want to lead people, we want to change something, we want to make an impact, and we are only working with the information from our lens, from our perspective, we just don't have enough information. And our closed-mindedness will cause us to miss crucial information every single time. Even if there's a view that you disagree with, again, you might be able to understand a certain point or a certain element of that thing might, spark you to think about a piece of your view of this concept or idea, whatever. I'm being very vague, but, again, we can get inspiration from anywhere. So you don't have to agree with something to appreciate its value and the value that it adds to a conversation. And essentially in this video, I want to talk about how to use those differences, especially in moments of conflict and things like that, to come up with more realistic and honest and relevant solutions to the problems that we're all trying to solve. So let's kind of go back to a little bit of what I was talking about in my previous video. Everybody has a different worldview, a lens, through which they see the world. And it's shaped by so many different things: our social lives, our families, our experiences, our identities, our history. And those lenses help us to see some things so clearly, and they also help us to see other things, or to not see other things, to render them basically invisible. There are things that are completely outside of our worldview, and because we can't see them, they don't exist to us. So when we talk about difference being data, somebody else bringing a different perspective could be opening up your worldview to something you didn't even realize was a part of the idea or concept that you're thinking about. So when we're working with people closely or in close proximity to people whose lenses just don't match at all, there's a misalignment, we can tend to feel threatened. It's kind of like, are you saying I'm wrong? Are you, what's going on here? But sometimes another opinion or perspective isn't there to change your mind. It's there to expand your mind. It's so funny. In my last video, I was talking about the comfort, challenge, chaos zone model. And some of this can be applicable there too. If it is a challenge for you to encounter ideas different from your own, and think about them with some level of credibility, then that's a step you might want to take, because, might want to actively try to take, because if you don't, you're missing out. Your worldview, your comfort zone is not growing, is not expanding, because you're not allowing it to. You're not allowing yourself to get into that challenge zone. You being challenged by somebody else's perspective is not a direct challenge to you, your idea, or your identity. And I think we have to, it's hard because so much of we are our identities, we are wrapped up in them, and we are wrapped up in the way that we see things through the lenses that those identities create for us. But we have to be able to expand our view if we want to really be able to make effective change. Essentially, we're looking at differences as data points. One person's story isn't proof of, a universal law, but as you collect different stories, as you listen to different people, as you hear different perspectives, your picture of reality gets sharper and more complete. It's kind of like all the different perspectives are adding pixels. I don't know if that makes any sense, but something about resolution and sharpness of image. I'm not a photographer. I don't know, but something. If you are a photographer, maybe you can make that metaphor work. But basically, you collecting. So basically what I'm trying to say is it's also kind of like doing research. When you conduct one interview, you have a clue as to what's going on. But when you conduct several interviews, 100 interviews, you can start to see patterns. So again, one interview is going to give you a hint, and dozens of interviews is going to give you a much fuller, clearer picture. And those interviews might conflict with each other. Two different people might have two very different views of the same situation. And that is data. That is, again, that's not a problem to solve. It is information to have, understanding that a solution is going to have to touch both of these things, both of these kind of differing realities. I recently heard the quote. I don't remember where I was, and I wish I do. I wish I did remember, because I want to give the person credit. I don't think they created the quote, but I just want to give them credit for introducing it to me. But essentially, they said, "You can't create something for me without me." And I think that is so important. And it kind of goes into what I'm saying. It made me think about this, rather, because a lot of the times people come in, researchers or teachers or, community advocates or whoever, they come in, they view a situation, and they think they have a very clear understanding of what's going on, and they are only seeing things through their lens. They don't always try to get the perspective. Actually, let's bring this to leadership. Let's say a new leader joins a team, and they come in, they observe, they see how things are going, because that's what you should do. I agree, that's what you should do. And then they start to make decisions just based off their observations and their understanding of the situation. That's not helpful. you have to talk to all the people, or maybe not all, but hopefully all, but whatever. You have to talk to the people in that department, talk to your new direct reports, talk to your colleagues, talk to people around you so that you have an understanding of their understanding of the situation, because what you see might not be what's actually happening. And because you're new, or because you just don't have access to kind of the history of everything that's going on, your observations might be fresh, but they also might be lacking context. And so you want to talk to your team. For example, when I joined my last job, I joined as a director of the office, right? And I inherited one team member, and she had been holding it down. I'm going to make a video about that one day. She had been holding it down for years by herself. Because I was coming, after COVID had kind of decimated things, whatever. I didn't come into that role saying, okay, I see how things are going based on my experiences and what I know. This is how we're going to move forward. I did not do that. I had a genuine bond with this person. I didn't force it, but I relied on her so much. And I don't mean that in I was putting a burden on her, but I asked her a lot of questions. I talked to her about what she thought, what she wanted to see, things that she had seen in the past, because I'm just getting here and what has been tried, what has worked. I talked to people in different departments who had worked with our office before about what do you see? What relationship have you had in the past with this office? I didn't just come in and say, yep, I'm the director of this office and I'm going to do things this way. And sometimes I would get somebody else from a different office maybe would view my position very differently than I did. And that was a data point. That wasn't if I had viewed every single version of that, that kind of instance as an affront to me, it would have been a very difficult start to my work there. I just understood things have changed over time, and we have to get on the same page about what it is, how our offices are relating to one another, how our offices are working together. And again, that information differed from my perspective of my role in our office, but I needed that information so that I could incorporate it and, start to do the things that we needed to be able to do. Editing Janae here. I just want to really quickly point out that I also didn't have to accept every single expectation that another person put on me just based on previous experiences. Those conversations were opportunities for both of us to not reset, but to adjust our expectations and how we were going to work together moving forward. So I also want to be clear that I'm not the only one, in this scenario making concessions. Other people also have to make concessions, and I have to hold to those boundaries. But I just wanted to be clear that yes, those differences were data points, and that if you're the one coming in, you don't have to be the one making all the concessions, but you do need to be aware of, whatever expectations and things, out there are. Now, to keep it in the personal space, I do tend to, I'm an information gatherer. I love to know things. I think I might have said this in a video before, but when I was younger, my mom had a tagline for me. She would introduce me to people and she was like, hi, this is Janae, and she likes to know things, because she knew I was going to drive people crazy, asking them questions and being curious about things. And she wanted to give the folks a heads up. But yeah, I've always been like that. I love to gather data. So I think that's why, to me, it's been so clear to me for most of my life that difference is data. I've always thought of different people's stories as just more information about how people interpret things, how people act differently than I would in a situation, whatever. And so I love a good listening session. I love reading. I love hearing different stories and surveying people. That's my sweet spot. My strength is being able to, one, see patterns, but also see multiple different angles and different perspectives. I can see the forest and the trees. And that's one of the things that I lean into in my work. But I will say that strength does have a shadow to it. And that shadow would be analysis paralysis. I can go so deep into building consensus and finding perspectives, information gathering, that it's actually delaying taking action or making a decision or something like that. And I say all that to say, obviously I'm talking about how difference is data and how data gathering is good, and I believe that. But I also want to be clear that there is a point at which you have to stop gathering data and move forward. And maybe, hopefully, your plans are flexible enough that if you obtain data after the data gathering period, it's something that you can incorporate. But again, I just want to call out, as I'm advocating for uncovering differences and finding all of these data points and all of that, that at some point you do have to take that information and do something with it. It really, expanding your mind and your mindset, I think, is highly important. But in terms of a task-oriented focus, the gathering information does nothing if you don't do anything with the information that you gather in a timely fashion. I can't gather information about something for 5 years, when the solution, they needed it a year ago, or, a year after I started. That's not helpful. I just wanted to bring up that point. And really the way I combat that is, I kind of just mentioned it throughout the whole talking point, but I try to set a clear learning phase, so that I have this is my period of time to gather information, and I set it at a broad enough time range where I feel comfortable, but only relative to the timeline of the project, if that makes sense. So if I have 5 months to do something, obviously this is depending on what the thing is and all of that, but I might take 3 weeks to do information gathering and then get into the planning and implementing and, all of that. Whereas if I have a year to do something, then I might spend 2 months in information gathering, yada, yada, yada. Then, like I said, I just have to have a cutoff point, a decision date by which, after that, we're done information gathering. And then again, the plan being flexible enough to where if I encounter new information, I can input it without throwing everything off. And maybe even building in an intentional check-in at some point, so that we can say, here is a good pivot point if we need, if there's more information to be had, or if we've done these things and we've gotten more information at this point, how can we pivot? And how might we pivot? So that's really helpful if that is something that you struggle with too. Definitely build those into your plans. It will change your life, honestly. It really will. All right, let's talk about conflict. Let's shift a little bit. I want to talk about that because I think conflict gets a bad rap. We see that as proof that something's broken, that something's needs to be fixed. But in so many spaces, and especially in systems thinking and organizational psychology, which is where a lot of this thought and research comes from, conflict is actually normal. It's almost necessary. Conflict is essentially the tension between different needs or values or perspectives. And I talk in my not my last video, but in the Difference Isn't Deviance video about the need to be able to hold tension between two conflicting ideas inside of the same container. And this is very much a part of what I'm talking about here. Another quick story about one of my classes in this doctoral program. We had it was my leadership semester. No, it was our change semester when we were talking about change. And we started out that theory class, reading from this very old book, and written by Katz and Kahn, and back in the 60s, I want to say. And so we would always talk about, oh my gosh, we have to go to the Katz and Kahn book. But I will say, Katz and Kahn do address this in some way. They talk about organizations living in this constant balance between conflict and equilibrium. Essentially, conflict tests the system, while equilibrium is the period where we readjust to those changes caused by the conflict. So if two people disagree, it's not necessarily that they're misaligned or inherently opposed in some deep way. It might mean that they're just naming two different parts of the truth. And so again, we have to be able to hold that tension and recognize both parts of that as we come up with solutions and ideas and all of that. Now, confrontation also gets a bad rap understandably, but it's really just the act of like naming and talking about the conflict. And when that happens, and when it happens well, it can really open the door to a better understanding, more thorough understanding, and just better decisions being made all around. So now I want to talk about a very quick framework on how to view, frame, and work through conflict. So first, think about how you view conflict and try going in with these 3 assumptions. First, this person has data that I don't have. Second, I'm not seeing the full picture. And third, we're both shaped by our roles, histories, and identities here. I think just those 3 assumptions can turn a defensive moment into a curious one. And that's when we can start to like learn and expand. Second, let's think about how we frame conflict. So instead of thinking, oh, this is a fight, this is an argument, frame it as, oh, the tension here is trying to tell us something. You can say to the other person, it looks like, we're viewing this from very different angles. Let's kind of each map out, what we're seeing so that we can work together, and instead of like debating who's right back and forth. So visually, if you can imagine a line and there's two opposite things pulling on each end of the line. Conflict is the tension, on the line between those two things. And our goal, our objective should be to figure out why these two things are pulling from each other, as opposed to just trying to erase one of them altogether so that the tension is gone. And third, there's the way to work through the conflict. Now, there are a couple of things. I'm just going to throw them at you really quickly, and hopefully something in here makes sense for you. You can try to slow down your reaction. You can take a breath, say, okay, I'm feeling a little defensive here. Let me listen before I respond. You can name the difference. You can say, I'm coming from X experience. I can see that you're coming from Y. Can we try and lay this out, map it out so that we can see where there may be overlap and where the actual tension points are? You can kind of rotate roles. I talked about this in my meeting video, which I actually think I might do a follow-up to that too. But rotate facilitators, have something like a talking stick or whatever, basically so that the dominant voices don't drown out the quieter ones, and do that through the structure that rotation or whatever creates. You can also use different forms of media. I kind of talk about this in my meetings video too, but some people are just kind of naturally quieter, more observant, or I won't say that, but naturally quieter, maybe won't speak up as much. So talk things through, but also use sticky notes, use anonymous, like a digital anonymous feedback or something like that. Like, give different ways or supply different ways for people to give feedback and to give their perspective on specific issues. I think another good way to do this is just to ask questions from a very curious space. What would harm look like here? If we take into account your perspective of this situation, what changes in the way that we approach it, what changes in the outcome, who are the stakeholders here, and what's at stake for each of them. Really thinking that through, and really being able to ask people questions to tease out their worldview, because sometimes people believe things and they think things, they don't exactly know why, or they know why, but they haven't really parsed it out. And so you want to encourage them to think it through out loud, so that other people maybe that are maybe not agreeing or have a different perspective can identify the points at which their perspectives do converge, so that there's some kind of overlay, some kind of starting point for a compromise, negotiation, a holding of those tensions together. And the last thing I want to mention is that you can end by surfacing shared learning, and not just telling people to think about, what came up here. Yes, absolutely do that. But maybe even at the end of the meeting, asking specifically the question of, what did you learn here that you didn't know before? And how might that understanding, how might that information or whatever incorporate into how you move forward with your piece of this project, or, whatever the case is. The thing is, the goal here is not forced alignment. It is more complete understanding and wiser action. So now I want to zoom in really quickly on something that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And remember, if you haven't watched my video about chaos challenge or comfort challenge chaos zones, remember I talk about how the discomfort sometimes being challenged again by someone else's perspective and sitting in that challenge zone is what's actually going to help you grow. So I just want to plug that in. But if you are challenged by someone who says that your idea, your decision, your comment doesn't really reflect their reality, it's really easy to get defensive and to kind of shut that down. You might start, well, I meant well, I did my research, those types of responses. You might even tell someone, or at least hint to someone, that you think they're overreacting. But I think that if you really feel like this is done in good faith and there is some level of discernment here, there are three things that you can do. You can acknowledge that might be the case, or that is the case. Just a quick thank you for telling me, I didn't realize that. It doesn't cost you anything. That's quick. You can also ask them more about it. Ask them, if you have the capacity right now, can you share with me more about what I'm missing? Because, it's not their job necessarily. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not their job to inform you of everything, or to take you through their history so that you understand their perspective. So you do want to ask if they have the capacity to do this. You don't want to kind of force this labor on somebody, but you do also want to ask them to shed more light on that if they are willing. And then to adjust, acknowledge, or we've already acknowledged, but say, here's how I will move forward now with that kind of information. This is how my thought or my process or my whatever will change. And I will say, don't rush that adjust piece. You do want to do it relatively quickly, but you don't want to promise something that you're not going to do. And again, this is all assuming that all of this is happening in good faith. Okay, when we do this well, when we collect the data and we aren't afraid of conflict, that conflict can become a discovery tool and not, the beginning of some terrible damage report or something like that. So in organization, research actually shows that when you create space for multiple perspectives, whether that be through, rotating facilitation of meetings, rotating leadership, just general storytelling from the group, you tend to get deeper trust, more accurate data, and better decisions. I've seen that in so many things that I've done. Once people feel safe to talk about what's actually happening, then we can address what's actually happening and have solutions for what's actually happening, and people can feel better about whatever the situation is. When people are afraid, again, there's that term psychological safety. I've talked about it in several videos so far, and I will continue to talk about it. But when people feel safe to bring up certain things, to talk about their concerns and all of that, then you can really surface again what's really going on and address it. If people aren't safe to do that or don't feel safe to do that, whatever solution you create is not going to address the actual problem, because no one has talked about the actual problem yet. So we need to create spaces where people feel comfortable bringing in conflict, not for the sake of conflict, but for the sake of a more full and deep understanding. So really, we never want to come at this as like, how do we end conflict? How do we get rid of conflict? How do we avoid conflict? That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is be able to and have a good plan to use the conflict to become more honest and more whole together, and have a more honest and whole solution to whatever it is that we're trying to solve for. So I sum it all up to say, we're basically, if difference is data, then your job as a leader, as a teammate, as a friend, as a colleague, is to become a better listener and a better sense maker. The next time you feel that little tightness in your chest because somebody is disagreeing with you, just ask yourself, what kind of data might they have that I don't have access to right now? So yeah, I would love to hear in the comments about a time where you had a conflict that really kind of broadened your understanding of a situation, or even in a relationship where you had a conflict or like a fight with your partner. And again, I'm not saying, oh yay, tell me about your fight, but how sometimes that brings a stronger level of understanding and allows people to bond more because they see more where each other is coming from in a certain aspect. So anyway, at any place where conflict has happened and you've learned from it, I would love to hear about that because I think it just kind of illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. So yeah, please leave thoughts about that in the comments below. So if this was helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Send it to someone who's maybe navigating a tough conversation right now or any kind of conflict, and just help them to think through it a little bit more. And remember, your perspective always matters, but it is never the only one. And with that, I will bid you adieu. Let's keep remixing leadership together, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.